Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here, and let's talk about Biden. Come on, man! Um, as we all know, he's repealed the transgender military ban. Now, they were talking about this on the Lotus Eaters today, and I thought they had some good points. To some extent, if you have a transgender person who's transitioning and taking hormones, it's almost like it's a medical condition. And in the army, there are there are certain conditions where they won't take you. Certain medical conditions where they won't take you. Now, the compromise that some people were saying was, well, there are other things other than line combat in the military forces that you could do, right? You could be back at base and resupplying people. That's not something that's going to be, something that a person with a medical issue can't do. Um, but it's this idea that we have to accommodate everybody in every situation. It is the military. The military doesn't accommodate you if you're tired. They might accommodate you if you have a condition that makes you incapable of getting up or something. I don't know, something like lupus, I guess. They probably wouldn't accommodate you. They would probably kick you out. So, the idea that we can fight a war and accommodate someone who may or may not be dealing with, transitioning is not a small thing. It's a big thing, and it requires, a lot of attention for that person. And I'm not saying that that person can't find other ways to contribute, but you're talking about the military where you have to be extremely focused and ready. And the question is, can you be extremely focused and ready when you're trying to grapple with the issue of your own sexuality? That's a real question. Um, it's not the same as when there were segregated units by race. That's different. That was about race discrimination. That was about the army trying to say, well, we don't want our soldiers fighting with each other, so we're going to try to segregate them, and that'll solve the problem. Not that it really did. I guess you could say it kind of solved it in the short term, but not really, because ultimately those different units were treated differently. Um, when you're in the army or the military, you put on a uniform. It's not a multiform, right? You don't get to be like the 80s G.I. Joe cartoon and everybody gets to do their own thing and have their own code name and have their own pet that flies around or, scuba gear or whatever. You conform. That's the whole point of the military. So, you know, I'm not sure this is anything other than Biden just pushing back on Trump policies to look woke. I don't think he gives a flip about trans people, quite frankly. I think this is all for show. The guy is older than Trump, and he probably is one of the few people alive who lies more than Trump. So, you know, I wouldn't take this at face value. And I think ultimately it's just going to cause a lot of headaches. And when you get right down to it, imagine there is a war and you're in the front lines and there's just shortages and you have a trans person in your unit and they can't get their hormones, and then it could really impact them. Then what? What is that person going to do? They may have to just do without. And that's a real problem, right? That's a real problem for them. So, Biden signs executive actions on racial equity. This is probably the big one. This is Biden's bizarro half-ass attempt at socialism and communism. Because he's trying to even not the playing field, but the outcome. But he can't. No one can. The executive actions and the Justice Department's use of private prisons, which is a good thing, recommit the federal government to tribal sovereignty and take steps to combat discrimination against Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders that have intensified during the pandemic. I don't know where you're getting that, but so I mean, for too long we've allowed a narrow, cramped view of the promise of this nation to fester. Biden is living in the leftist bubble because it suits his political agenda. He can hide behind that because everything he does, he can say, well, if you don't agree, obviously you're some sort of racist bigot. You cannot manage a country by race. You can't do it. You can't make policy based on race. Race-based policy is discriminatory and it's racist. And it doesn't surprise me that Biden's in favor of it, quite frankly, because he has shown in his past that he worked with racists. He said racially charged things on the floor of Congress. He is a guy, quite frankly, I don't think he cares about anybody other than himself and his power base. And this is just an avenue to power. It's an avenue to say, hey, everybody, listen to me or you're a bigot. This is what the people around him do, too. And many of the people around him, I think, actually believe this nonsense, but they're just stubborn. A lot of these SJWs are stubborn. They think they know better than you. They've gone down this path. They've decided that they're right, and that's it. There's no flexibility in that. I was listening to James Lindsay on the ride back home, and he's got a channel called New Discourses, and he's starting to break down this essay. It was written back in 1965 by a cultural Marxist named, I can't remember the guy's name. It began with an M. I forget the guy's name, but it's the newest video. And it wasn't Foucault. It was Macron. I think it was almost like Macron. Not quite. Anyhow, basically, when you read it, it's an intellectual argument for doing stuff like this simply because you're right. And one of the arguments was it's okay to silence the right because in his view, only the right can escalate in extreme to the point at which, fascism would exist and then we'd all be in trouble. Only the right. The left, being good, can be allowed to basically do what we saw this summer. They can be allowed to burn and loot. That's fine. They're allowed those excesses according to this ideology because ultimately it's okay because they're right and they're heading towards liberation. Liberation meaning communism. Liberation meaning liberation from capitalism into communism. It all goes back to communism, all this ideology. Biden has embraced that, even though if he thinks he can use it to his advantage and just step out, he can't. He can't. He's put himself in a trap that he can't escape. Not without really doing damage to himself and the people around him, which he'll never do. And he's really playing into China's hands. China's all over this. China's out there supporting Black Lives Matter, saying how racist America is. Meanwhile, they have some of the most racist practice of any country on earth. They openly discriminate against black people in China. Openly. No one talks about this. Certainly not the communists in this country, and many of them are in the Biden administration. Biden dealt a blow on 100-day deportation moratorium. Biden administration announced the moratorium to the president's first day in office. A federal judge in Texas on Tuesday blocked Biden administration from enforcing a 100-day moratorium on most deportations, delivering an initial blow for President Joe Biden on one of his core campaign promises. Thank God. Thank God the judges are fighting back. What a reversal of fortune, right? Thank God Trump appointed all these judges. This is the only thing that might slow these guys down. U.S. District Judge Drew Tipton issued a temporary restraining order that halts the moratorium on the Biden administration announced on its first day. Comes after Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton last week filed a lawsuit against the federal government over the 100-day pause, which was announced in a memorandum from the Department of Homeland Security. Thank God. Good. Fight back. At least jam this up in the court system for a while. Joe Biden, America is a, quote, nation of morally deprived people who are, quote, less prosperous due to systematic racism. This is the view of Joe Biden. He's perfectly willing to say, oh, there's a dark winter. Oh, this is going to get worse. Oh, we're a nation of morally deprived people who are less prosperous. I mean, listen to this guy. What did Trump say? Trump said everything positive. This guy says nothing but nothing but darkness. Democrats are just so dark these days. They weren't always this way. They weren't always this way. Oh, apparently there's a video. I don't know. I can't watch the video. Joe Biden, I believe we are in the battle for the soul of this nation, and the simple truth is our soul will be troubled as long as systematic racism is allowed to persist. He couldn't even define it if you asked him. So how are you going to stop it? We can't eliminate simply overnight. We can't eliminate everything. He's slurring his words. But it's corrosive, it's destructive, and it's costly. Well, if you can't eliminate everything, what's the point? It cost every American, not just who felt the sting of racial injustice. We're not just a nation of morally deprived. We're not just a nation of morally deprived because of systematic racism. We're also less prosperous. We're less successful. We're less secure. None of that's true. At this point, that's just blather. Speaking of blather, here's NBC News. Biden holds first phone call with Russia's Putin. Oh, will everybody say, hey, what did he say on that phone call? President Biden made clear the United States will act firmly in defense of its national interest in response to actions by Russia that harm us or our allies, the White House said. Oh, good. We're going to start a war with Russia, just like the Democrats wanted. Well, at least when we're prowling the radioactive wastelands for leftover cans of food, we won't have to listen to Joe Biden screw up anymore. President Biden made clear the United States will act firmly in defense of its own national interests. The two presidents agreed to maintain transparent and consistent communication going forward. Yeah, wow. So you threaten them and say, well, let's keep in touch so I can continue to threaten you. Biden discussed a 5-year extension to the New START, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, agreeing to have their teams work urgently to complete the extension by February 5th. Yeah, there's just one problem. The Russians have been developing missiles like crazy, and just rushing to sign this on just so you could show, oh, see, I'm a peacemaker too, doesn't do jack. Because the Russians are already on the next phase of weaponry, whatever that is. So thanks for leaving us behind, Biden. Biden's already surrendered to the virus, according to WND. Yeah, this is from the other day. Joe Biden says there's nothing we can do about the pandemic in the coming months. Now he says the trajectory of the pandemic can't be changed in the coming months no matter what we do. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think that was always the case. I think just the Democrats didn't want to say anything while Trump was in office. They'd rather blame him. But, you know, it continues to be incredibly depressing. Michael Goodwin, I'm ignoring Biden's unity talk. Here's why you should too. Knitting together a fractured America around a far-left agenda was never going to work. Yep. As the late journalist Mickey Carroll told it, a suburban town with a population of 90% Irish and 10% Jewish held a mayoral election involving two candidates, one Irish and one Jewish. This is a joke, by the way, on the Fox News page. The Irish candidate won. Wouldn't you know it? 90% of the vote, whereupon he immediately denounced the clannishness of the Jewish people. The story offers a useful way to view Joe Biden calls for national unity. Let's just say our president is as sincere as the fictional Irish mayor. I don't really get that, but I don't really think that applies. Yeah. But, I mean, yeah, the leftist agenda is not what people want. And the problem is, too many Democrats voted for it because they didn't really think about what they were voting for. So, I thought this would be a good one, Mike, but you let me down. Dem squad members tried to save... Get out of here. Dem squad members... Get out of here, ad. Oh, my gosh, Google. Try to save worst killers of all. Presley and Bush demand Biden commute sentences of all 49 federal prisoners on death row, including Charleston church shooter Dylan Roof and Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. So, the Boston bomber and Dylan Roof, you actually want to let off. You don't want them executed. Okay. What do you just want to burn down the house with them in it? Is that what you want to do? Maybe just make sure they can never earn a living. Just cut them loose. With a social worker, I'm sure. Biden is known to oppose the death penalty. Is unlikely to allow it during his term in office. Why is he unlikely to allow it if he opposes the death penalty? The plea, which is supported by 35 Democrats. 35 Democrats are this stupid? Wow. Comes after former President Trump ordered the execution of 13 killers the last week of office. Yeah, I mean, Dylan Roof, come on. That kid. And imagine if Trump had said, oh, maybe I'll consider that. People would have lost their damn minds. So, this is just bizarre. I mean, I've said I'm against the death penalty. I don't think the state can apply it evenly, but I don't know where the left is coming from on this, because I don't think they have any scruples whatsoever. I don't see how this gains them any power. The fan of murderers vote? I don't know. Can Joe unite us from American greatness? No. If Biden's idea of unity is to try to impose far-left Biden-Sanders unity program on the country, his administration is a prestigious one-term fiasco. I don't think it'll be a whole term. I think it'll be maybe a year. Maybe. And finally, Glenn Greenwald. Always great, Glenn Greenwald. Democratic Party, the epitome of fascism. They claim to fight. He doesn't mince words. Not Greenwald. Nope. This is from Tucker Carlson tonight on January 25th. And, he just basically blasts the Dems, as he always does. But he's a liberal himself. He's an actual liberal. He's a liberal with, principles. He didn't like Trump. He's not a Trump guy at all. He'd never vote for Trump. But he has principles, unlike the rest of the Democrats, 99% of them at this point. They're either drunk with power or have just gone totally bonkers into identity politics. This racial equity thing, all it's going to do is divide the country even more and make, some of these woke companies money, I guess. I mean, are they going to pass a law saying if you don't buy certain products, you're a bigot? It's probably just an excuse to crush their competition. Either add, diversity quotas on their employees so they have to hire more people that they can't afford, or, just call their products racist, kind of like what they did to Parler, basically. I think Parler has a really good lawsuit, though. I think they'll be back eventually. I think it might be a long road for Parler, but, once that lawsuit's done, they're going to have a big pile of money. I think they're going to have a big, giant pile of money. And at that point, Parler could come back. But, might be 5 years from now. So that's it for the Biden administration, continuing to, fall down the stairs. Is anybody going to stop this guy? I mean, Really? I mean, how much more damage are you going to let them do to the country and your party? I told you this would be an absolute fiasco if Biden got in. This isn't just damaging the Biden brand, although that's beyond repair, I think. Everything Biden does is on the Democrats as a whole because they're almost too united. Yeah, I'll say it. They are too united. As disparate as the Republicans are now, the Democrats are too united. They're one front. There's almost no one left with any credibility. Tulsi Gabbard's leaving. She's the last shred of credibility the Democrats had. Who's left? No one. Even Patrick Leahy is gonna try Trump in some kangaroo court that probably won't even show up. It's gonna be ridiculous. So I don't see where we go here, Democrats. You guys just gotta shutter the doors, and I don't know what possessed you behind the scenes. I think it's probably a bunch of deep staters using you as proxies to gain more power, but I don't really have any proof of that. So just a hunch. Kind of like what they did to the neocons for a while, and then they just abandoned them. But look who supports the Democrats now. Max Boot, of all people, screaming for, the Capitol Hill rioters to be locked up or whatever. It's the same old faces. They just switch sides and pretend like, oh, now we're woke. Now we're woke and going into Syria to bomb people. But this time it's not for oil. It's for diversity. Yeah. Humanitarian wars are coming. Brace yourself.